After many months of claiming to have evidence to prove his innocence but producing nothing, Conor Benn has finally put out a statement that actually does detail at least some of the evidence and clarifies the nature of his defense. So here is what Conor Benn had to say. The WBC have declared me innocent of being a drugs cheat. I am grateful for the ultimate finding. It was the right decision and it was the only one I was willing to accept. The easy option would have been to accept a 6-month ban, save myself a huge legal bill, and simply move on. But my reputation and my family name is worth more to me than that. My only frustration is that the manner in which I've been cleared has seemed to create further questions and add further fuel to baseless negative speculation. As such, having now had time to digest, I wanted to set out my position in full and explain in the simplest terms why I am innocent. As you will have gathered from my posts and comments over the past few months, I have always been extremely confident that I will be cleared. This is because all of the evidence and information that came to light during our investigation into how this happened proves what I already knew, that I am innocent. However, because of ongoing legal proceedings, I have been repeatedly advised not to say anything, keeping silent when I have this evidence in my possession, and listening to ignorant, uninformed commentary was one of the hardest parts of this process. Even following the WBC's statement, I could have just said nothing, but I told my team I will not stay silent any longer and have to let the facts be known. So here's what I can say. In my defense to the WBC and the 270-page report provided to them, at no point did I indicate that I failed any VADA tests because of contaminated eggs. As part of its lengthy investigation, the WBC instructed its own experts to review my supplements and diet, and they concluded that egg contamination was the most likely cause. Those experts have seen this issue arise in elite athletes across other sports, and I have no reason to question their analysis when it concludes I am not a cheat. However, I feel like the WBC statement did a disservice to my defense, which was based upon a comprehensive scientific review of the testing procedures, which set out a number of reasons why we believed the test results were completely unreliable and proved beyond any reasonable doubt that I am innocent. The report prepared by my science and legal team contained extensive analysis of both tests and concluded that there was clear evidence of fundamental flaws and irregularities. By way of just one example, my sample appears to have come back clear the first 3 times it was tested. Without explanation, it was then retested again after 9 days, and only then did it show a trace positive result. It should only have been tested once. These critical findings were endorsed by an independent expert scientist who provides accreditation to laboratories, and his opinion was that many issues were so troubling and serious that the lab could lose its accreditation. My team will be referring the issues to the relevant accrediting body so it can make its own determination. For what it's worth, and contrary to the media speculation at the time, I requested the B sample to be tested at the earliest opportunity. Because of the importance of trying to get to the bottom of what had happened, I arranged for a scientist to fly across the world to attend the testing procedure in person, as you're allowed to do under the rules, and unbelievably, she was not even allowed to be in the room when the test results came through. How's that for transparency? I have been advised that's a major breach of an athlete's rights, and had it been necessary to go to the Court of Arbitration for Sport on this case to prove my innocence, that alone would have meant the test results were dismissed. Let me be absolutely clear though. My defense is not a technical defense to exploit a loophole. I am convinced that the substance was never in my system, and I certainly never knowingly ingested it. I am told it's something that supposedly stays in the body for months, and yet barely a week after failing a VADA test, I passed a UCAD test. I have never previously failed any kind of anti-doping test and passed multiple tests with both UCAD and VADA in close proximity to the 2 tests that returned adverse findings. This adds further proof to my belief that the findings were testing errors. Even if it actually was in my system, it was at such a low level that it could never have had an effect and could never have been consumed with the intention of having an effect. That is why Eubank Jr. was willing to go ahead with the fight, having taken his own medical advice, as we supplied all of the relevant information to them known at the time, and indeed the board, back in October 2022. For now, I have to focus on rebuilding my career, as this has cost me a great deal of time and money. But at some point, I want to make a stand on behalf of athletes who may find themselves in a similarly devastating position to me, but without the expertise or resources to clear their name. Everything I have learned during this process from talking to many experts gives me serious concerns about the whole testing system in the sport. Anti-doping protections are obviously extremely important, but so is ensuring people are given due process and presumed innocent until proven guilty. Cheaters should be caught and punished, but people like me who prove their innocence should be vindicated and allowed to continue their career. For those who gave me their unwavering support, I will forever be grateful. For those who said they would wait for a verdict before deciding I was guilty, I appreciate your patience. As for the British Board of Boxing Control, they attacked me publicly and privately during the most difficult time in my life, treating me with utter contempt and without any consideration for fair process or my mental state. I am aware that many people will not even bother to read this statement in full and continue to make their snap judgments without thinking. There is nothing I can do to change that, but I take comfort in what I know is true and have proven with evidence. I am innocent. I wouldn't wish for my worst enemy to experience what me and my family have gone through, but next time I step into the ring, I will be mentally tougher than I ever was before. Okay, so let's dissect this. Now, I said time and time again in numerous videos since the very beginning of this saga that since Conor Benn had a clean record prior to 2022, I wanted to allow due process to take place before I came to any concrete conclusions about his guilt or innocence. I don't want to be involved in a witch hunt. This is not Jarrell Miller, somebody who has a long history going back many years of failed PED tests. This is a guy who had no prior history. Now, the way that Conor Benn and his team have handled the situation from a PR perspective has been absolutely atrocious, incriminating even. But I said all along that it's wise to wait for all the information to come out first before you form any concrete conclusions. That's what I've been trying to do. And as a result, as usual, when you take the middle path, when you try to be objective, everybody hates you for it. On one side, people who believe Conor Benn is guilty were having a go at me for not condemning him. And on the other side, Conor Benn fans who believe he's innocent were having a go at me for not exonerating him. I don't get involved in all that stuff, people. My task here, my job here, my ethos here on this channel is to be objective. Now, from the very start, this has been an absolute PR disaster by Conor Benn. Whether he's guilty or innocent, the way that he's decided to handle it has been terrible. And the same goes for Eddie Hearn, by the way. If Conor Benn has a PR team, he needs to sack them. And if he doesn't have a PR team, he needs to hire one, and a good one, right away. Not just to handle this situation, but to handle any future situations. His lawyers advised him to stay silent, and that's what he should have done. Because while it is true that silence can imply guilt, opening your mouth and saying the wrong thing can be even worse. That's why when people get arrested, if they're not used to dealing with law enforcement, they are sometimes advised by their legal representative not to speak, whether they're guilty or innocent. If Conor Benn actually is innocent, then I can understand his frustration. But everything he's said and done over the past few months has just fanned the flames. He would have made things a lot easier for himself by listening to his lawyers and, as I previously said, getting a PR team on the case. In any event, let's look at some of the things that he said in his statement. Now, first of all, he said the easy option would have been to accept a 6-month ban, save myself a huge legal bill, and simply move on, but my reputation and my family name is worth more to me than that. But that's not really the full story, is it? Because what he's referring to there, as far as the 6-month ban, is the WBC's investigation. If they concluded that Conor Benn had deliberately taken a banned substance, then that's what he would have faced with the WBC, a 6-month ban. But as of yet, Conor Benn has not cooperated with the British Boxing Board of Control and UKAD's investigation. And with them, he could be looking at a ban of up to 4 years. The next thing is that he said his defense was not based upon contaminated eggs. It was based upon lab contamination. But the WBC have cleared him based on contaminated eggs, because when they conducted their own investigation, they concluded that that was the most likely cause of the adverse finding. So why would the WBC dismiss or overlook the possibility of lab contamination? Well, the WBC employ the services of VADA to carry out testing for their clean boxing program. And VADA are the organization that found the adverse finding in Conor Benn's test. So if the WBC had come to the conclusion that VADA were at fault, then it not only could have damaged the reputation of VADA and therefore affected their future income, but also damaged the reputation of the WBC's clean boxing program and potentially opened the door for other fighters and other athletes to not only question VADA's test results, but potentially take legal action against them and the WBC. But just to be clear, I am not accusing VADA of shoddy practice, nor am I accusing the WBC of covering up for them. I'm just entertaining the possibility that that could have occurred. I'm putting it out there as a hypothetical scenario. But one question I would like to ask the WBC is, if it's true that Conor Benn's defense wasn't based on egg contamination, then what evidence do the WBC and VADA have that it was? They apparently looked at Conor Benn's diet and his supplements. So where precisely do they suspect this contamination occurred? Another thing that Conor Benn said is that he requested the B samples to be tested at the earliest opportunity. Now, the B sample is taken specifically in the event of lab contamination. There's a lot of misconceptions about what the B sample is. People thinking it's a separate test. It's not a separate test. They take one sample of fluid from the athlete and they divide that sample into two, A and B. What happens after that? Are they stored in different locations? I don't know. That's something I would like VADA to clarify. But the purpose of the B sample is so that if the A sample somehow gets contaminated or damaged, they've at least got a backup. Ben claims that he sent his own scientists across the world to go and observe the testing of the B sample, but that they were not allowed in the room when the results came through. And he says that that is a major violation of an athlete's rights. I'm not sure which rights specifically. I'd like to hear maybe one of his lawyers expand on that, and I'd certainly like to hear what VADA have to say about it. Conor Benn mentioned the fact that the two failed tests were taken around the same time as several UCAD tests, which he passed, and he used that as evidence of contamination. The logic being that if there really was clomiphene in his substance, the UCAD tests would have picked it up as well. But that's assuming their testing protocol and testing methods are equally as thorough when it comes to detecting this particular substance. And I don't know whether it is. What I can say is that in the Dylan White situation, it was UCAD who found the adverse finding in his sample when VADA didn't find anything. Remember, both VADA and UCAD tested Dylan White ahead of that Oscar Rivas fight. So what's going on there? Was it a case of UCAD having some contamination in their lab? Or was it a case of VADA not testing as thoroughly as UCAD in that particular instance? Eddie Hearn has spoken in the past about how VADA offer different services, whereby if you want the absolute best testing, their most thorough service, then obviously you're going to pay top dollar. If you want a less thorough service, it's going to be cheaper. So what level of service was paid for that Dylan White Oscar Rivas fight? Conor Benn says that his team discovered fundamental flaws and irregularities in VADA's testing protocol. But that is not the same as proving there was contamination in their lab. It perhaps opens the door for the possibility of contamination, but it doesn't prove it. Proving it would be to literally find traces of clomiphene elsewhere in the lab, perhaps on surfaces, on some of the instruments that were used to conduct Benn's test. And you might also expect to find other athletes who had their samples tested in the same lab as Ben at the same time to also have these adverse findings, right? Wouldn't that be a reasonable suggestion? Because whoever handled and conducted Ben's test would have handled and conducted other people's tests. So did those athletes also test positive around the very same time as Conor Benn? See, that would be more weighty evidence. Are we going to get anything like that in future? We'll have to wait and see, but we certainly haven't had anything like that from them as of yet. And finally, Ben said that the British Boxing Board of Control attacked him publicly and privately during what he calls the most difficult time of his life. He says they treated him with utter contempt and without any consideration a fair process for his mental state. Now, that is kind of ambiguous to me because as an outsider looking in, I can't quite see where Conor Benn is coming from. I'm not saying that he doesn't have just cause to be angry at them, but if he does, it's based upon information that I'm not privy to. From the information that we have, it appears as though the British Boxing Board of Control were not comfortable accepting the results of an investigation that was conducted by individuals appointed by Conor Benn himself or Conor Benn's team. The British board work with UKAD. That is the organization that conducts all the testing and investigations for them. It would appear that for some reason, Conor Benn didn't want UKAD to be involved in the investigation of the failed VADA tests. To my knowledge, neither Conor Benn or anyone who represents him has explained why this is. Bear in mind, VADA do not investigate anything. The WBC presided over the first test under their clean boxing program, but they had nothing to do with the second test. So who is there to investigate the second failed test, if not the British Boxing Board of Control and UKAD? In a court case, for example, you've got the prosecution, you've got the defense, you've got the judge, and you've got the jury. Now, the prosecution will bring out experts whose job is to present information that makes the defendant look guilty. But that is then contradicted by the experts on the defense team who present information designed to make the defendant look innocent. And of course, the lawyers are involved in arguing for each side. It's then the job of the jury, guided by the judge, to decide which expert they think has presented the more convincing data, the more convincing argument in the overall context of the case. But what it seems like here, again, as an outsider looking in with this Conor Benn situation, is that allegorically speaking, if we imagine the British Boxing Board of Control as the court judge, Conor Benn and his team of lawyers and experts have come into the court, but the jury and the prosecution are not present. Benn's team has then presented their case in front of the judge, and he wants the judge to make a ruling when the prosecution haven't had the opportunity to cross-examine Benn or dispute the findings of any of Benn's hand-picked experts. Now, I don't think there's any issue at all with Benn conducting his own investigation, but any reasonable person would acknowledge that there's a potential conflict of interest there. So you're going to investigate yourself and expect the board to accept the results? Now, I know that Team Benn have pointed out that Eubank was willing to accept the results after consulting with his medical team. But again, there's still a conflict of interest there because Team Eubank was still set to make an awful lot of money from the fight. I don't see why the board wanting UKAD to investigate is such an unreasonable request. Again, I can only go off the information that's come out in public. And here's another thing that puzzles me. Conor Benn says that he has no intention of reapplying for his British license. Therefore, why wouldn't you submit that 270-page dossier of evidence to the British board and allow UKAD to carry out their investigation? Because even if they ban you for 4 years, you didn't plan to fight under them again anyway. So what difference does it make? If he believes his evidence is so rock solid and his case is so ironclad, then why would you be afraid to present it to the British board and UKAD? Presumably, he believes that the British board and UKAD are conspiring to stitch him up. What reason they would have for doing such a thing, I don't know. Conor Benn seems to think that it may have something to do with the fact that his dad ripped up his British Boxing Board of Control license on television many decades ago. Would they really be that bitter and petty and hold a grudge for so long as to exact revenge for a father's indiscretion on the son? You guys let me know what you think. I'm not saying it's impossible, but I certainly haven't seen any evidence to suggest that it's probable. Anyway, I'll leave it there, people. Let me know what you guys think in the comments, and I'll catch you all on the next video. If it was a case of Conor Benn having failed several times in the past, like with Jarrell Miller, then I wouldn't even be hearing him out. I wouldn't even need to wait to hear from UCAD and the British board and all this kind of thing. But that's not the case. I want due process to take place before I make my mind up. I do believe in due process. I understand the psychology of crowds, the psychology of the mob. A lot of people don't want due process. They just want someone to take out their worldly frustrations on. And when a fighter is tested positive for something, particularly a fighter who is in a position of privilege because of his dad's name, some people see that as an easy target.
Are you sick and tired of the mainstream mindset? Does the dogmatic conformity and pathological ignorance have you tearing your hair out in frustration? Then don't be alone. Come and join our brotherhood on Patreon. We stand as a beacon of reason against an army of insanity. You'll gain access to my weekly topical podcast where we take more deep dives than Jacques Cousteau on an endless variety of subjects. There's also videos, interviews, live Q&As, as well as a vast back catalogue of previous episodes, including my popular Confessions of a Nightclub Bouncer series. You can listen via the Patreon app or download in high-quality MP3. Connect with myself and hundreds of other members in our Element chat group. There's no contract, no commitment, you can cancel at any time, and it's cheaper than a Mickey D's McMuffin. Just head to my Patreon page via the link below this video and select the tier called the Brotherhood of Reason. I'll see you over there.